The world was not built for children. Not here. Not beneath skies forever veiled by ash and fire. The child's first lullaby was the rumble of artillery shells, the distant thunder of orbital strikes falling like an unending heartbeat upon the earth. Their first toys were the shattered helmets of fallen guardsmen, the twisted casings of lost rounds, the bones of something once human, charred to blackened dust. Their first steps were taken not upon soft earth, but across rubble, jagged metal, and corpses half buried beneath the choking mud. This was life on a war-torn, Imperial world, and for those unlucky enough to be born into its ruins, childhood was less a beginning and more a curse. The planet was once a proud bastion of the Imperium, a hive world of endless towers and manufactoria. Now it was little more than a carcass, its cities stripped bare by centuries of conflict. Smoke clawed at the horizon in every direction. Entire districts had collapsed into craters, hive spires reduced to skeletal remains that jutted like broken teeth from the poisoned soil above. The stars were blotted out by smog, only the dull glow of burning promethium lighting the night. And even this faint light carried no comfort, for it only revealed more ruin, more ash, more death. It was here that children clawed their way into existence, not in hospitals, but in the shadows of collapsed hab blocks, wrapped not in cloth, but in rags pulled from corpses. They did not cry, for silence was survival. To weep was to be heard, and to be heard was to die. Every day was a ritual of hunger. The air itself tasted of metal and soot, and the food, if it could be called that, was scrapings of corpse starch, half-burnt fungus, or in darker corners of the hive, meat of an origin never spoken aloud. A child's hands were raw, calloused not from play, but from digging, through rubble, through corpses, through garbage. They were taught not to seek toys, but ammunition. Not stories, but scraps of ration tins. Not comfort, but concealment. And through it all, the whispers of the ecclesiarchy echoed, relentless and cruel. Priests screamed their sermons from broken pulpits, voices hoarse with smoke and despair. Suffer and endure, for the emperor watches your pain. Even the youngest were told that their suffering was holy, that their starvation, their wounds, their silence, was an offering. A child who faltered in faith was not corrected with kindness. No, they were beaten, broken, discarded. The Imperium had no place for weakness, no matter how small, no matter how young. And yet, the true horror was not the hunger, nor the sermons, nor even the constant threat of bombardment. It was the knowledge, for children here learned early the fate that awaited them. There were only 3 paths. The first, to be drafted, barely into their teens, into the endless tide of the Imperial Guard, thrust a laskin into hands still trembling, still small, and thrown into the meat grinder of the trenches. The second, to be taken by the munitorum, condemned to servitude in the manufactoria, their lungs filled with ash and their spines bent until they broke, their bodies consumed as fuel for the Imperium's war machines. And the third path, the one most feared, though all too common, was death in the mud, nameless and unmarked, their bones swallowed by the earth, their existence forgotten. There was no childhood here, only waiting, sight. A child's eyes did not see beauty, only the warped silhouettes of hive ruins against a poisoned sky, only corpses slumped in alleys, only the flicker of fires consuming what little remained of their homes. Sound. Their ears knew not laughter, but the shrieks of artillery, the crack of less fire, the distant screams that carried through the night before being cut short. Smell. The reek of promethium, of rot, of corpses too many to bury, seeped into every breath, every pore. Even infants smelled of death before they could even speak. Touch. Hands blistered from scavenging hot metal, feet cracked and bloodied from rubble, skin scarred by burns, lashes, and disease. This was the tapestry of their existence, stitched together with agony, hunger, and inevitability. But still, hope lingered. Not true hope, no, the Imperium did not allow such luxury. But the illusion of it, whispered from priest to mother, from mother to child, that all this pain was noticed, that their tiny broken lives meant something in the Emperor's eternal ledger. Yet, deep inside, every child knew the truth. The Emperor was silent. The stars were cold. And no one was coming to save them. The bombs fell again that night. A shell landed near a group of children huddled in a collapsed hab, its shockwave sending bodies flying like broken dolls. Screams pierced the air, then silence. Only one girl remained, clutching a torn doll made of cloth and bone, her face smeared with ash and blood. She did not cry out, she simply stared at the sky, waiting for the next bombardment, for the next collapse, for the next inevitable step on the path that every child walked here. And though she did not know it yet, her fate, and the fate of all children on this cursed world, was about to be decided, for war was coming closer. The front lines were shifting, and soon the children would not just be survivors, they would be consumed. The war did not wait for them to grow. It devoured them whole. When the front line crept closer, the children were swept into the current of the Imperium's hunger. The Munitorum scribes arrived with clipboards of parchment and quills dipped in ink, their robes stiff with filth. They did not ask for names nor ages. They did not ask if a child was ready. They merely counted heads, stamped seals, and dragged them away. There was no protest. A mother who screamed was beaten until her jaw cracked. A father who resisted was shot where he stood. The children learned silence long ago, and so they shuffled forward, their bare feet scraping across stone. Some were loaded into manufactoria trains, their bodies packed into rusting freight cars, bound for the factories where smoke rose like prayers to a dead god. Others, those with arms strong enough to hold a lasgun, no matter how thin or trembling, were pressed into service as soldiers. They were given uniforms that did not fit, boots too large, lasguns too heavy. The commissar's words were simple: the Emperor accepts all sacrifice, even yours. And so children marched to war. Site. The trenches stretched for miles, dug into the earth like the scars of some titanic beast. The walls dripped with mud and blood, sandbags leaking rot. Rusted barbed wire coiled like a serpent around the battlefield, its teeth still dripping with the flesh of those caught on its snare. Sound, endless rhythm of bombardment shook the air, shells screaming overhead before crashing into the mud. Boots stomped through the muck. Commissars barked orders. And somewhere beyond the smoke, alien war cries, or worse, demonic laughter, drifted closer. Smell, the reek of corpses filled the trenches, some fresh, others long rotted, blackened husks oozing into the mire. Add to this the stench of promethium, wet cloth, and unwashed bodies. It clung to every breath like a curse. Touch, the lasgun's grip tore at their blistered palms, the recoil bruising small shoulders. Splinters of rubble cut through their boots. The cold mud seeped into their bones, until even sleep brought no warmth. They were told they fought for the Emperor. But the children quickly learned they fought for survival. Each day blurred into the next, digging, firing, reloading, running. Their world was reduced to orders shouted into the chaos, the sharp crack of less fire, the sudden silence when a friend fell beside them. They had no time to weep. A boy no older than 12 held the line with eyes wide, lasgun shaking in his hands. When the enemy surged, he fired until his charge pack clicked empty. Then he screamed as they came closer. He did not even realize his throat had been cut open until the world spun, and he sank into the mud. The commissar did not mourn. He stepped forward, took the boy's lasgun, and pressed it into the hands of another. A girl of 10, barely tall enough to see over the trench wall. She said nothing. She aimed. She fired. This was the Imperium's way, yet the battlefield was not the only horror. For the war itself was twisted, corrupted. At night, the children whispered of shadows moving across no man's land, shapes that crawled through the smoke, bodies that did not fall when shot. They heard laughter carried on the wind, wet and gurgling. too close to be human. One girl swore she saw a soldier, one of their own, rise again after being torn apart, his body stitched together with rot and filth. His mouth moved, but no words came, only flies spilling forth in clouds. The priests declared it heresy to speak of such things. "Pray harder," they commanded. "Have faith." But the children knew the truth. Chaos was here. And it was hungry. One night, the bombardment ceased. The silence was worse than the noise. The trench froze. Even the commissar's voice faltered. The only sound was the buzzing of flies, growing louder, thicker, filling the air like a storm. Then came the smell. Not rot, not blood, but a stench so foul, so overwhelming, it clawed at the throat and made eyes water. It was sickness made manifest, disease made flesh. From the smoke emerged figures, bloated, rotting, their armor pitted and dripping with slime. Nurgle's children had come. Plague-bearers, their one-eyed visages leering through the fog, blades rusted and dripping with pestilence. Behind them, great swollen forms shambled forward, every step birthing more filth into the mud. The children fired. Law's rounds cut through the smoke. But for every demon that fell, 2 more rose. The commissar bellowed prayers. Priests raised icons. But the air itself seemed to rot around them. Flesh blistered. Wounds festered in seconds. Children clutched their bellies as their insides turned against them. A boy collapsed, coughing blood and bile, his skin bubbling with sores. Another's eyes burst, dripping green pus down his face. Their screams filled the trench, louder than any bombardment. Still, they were ordered to fight. Still, they were told this was holy. The girl with the oversized lasgun fired until her weapon overheated, her tiny hands blistering from the metal. She screamed, not in fear, but in rage, her voice swallowed by the buzzing of a million flies. The demons pressed closer. And then, a sound. From deeper within the fog came a voice. Not words, but laughter, wet, gurgling, joyous. The kind of laughter that stripped away courage and replaced it with despair. It rolled across the battlefield like thunder, shaking the children to their very bones. It was not the laughter of man. It was the laughter of a god. The commissar drew his pistol, his eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. The priests screamed their final litanies. The children raised their lasguns with trembling hands, but deep down, they knew. No amount of faith, no amount of fire, no amount of orders could stop what was coming. The war was not about to consume them. It already had, and as the fog closed in, as the buzzing drowned their prayers, the children understood their fate. They were not soldiers. They were offerings. They were offerings. The end did not arrive with a scream. It came with silence. When the laughter of Nurgle's children finally faded, the battlefield was no longer a place of war. It was a grave. The trenches overflowed with bodies, some whole, most broken, others warped into shapes that defied reason. Mud and flesh became indistinguishable, a single rotting mass under the pale light of a poisoned sky. Those who had been children were no longer recognizable. As such, a boy with no eyes stumbled through the mire, his arms outstretched as if groping for something that would never be there again. His skin sagged from his bones, riddled with boils that wept pus with every step. He whispered prayers, but his tongue was swollen, his words lost to choking gurgles. A girl sat against the trench wall, her lasgun clutched in blistered hands. She rocked back and forth, muttering the catechism she had been taught. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. Yet her teeth had rotted away in hours, her lips cracked and bleeding. Each word was a rasp, each breath a struggle against the sickness devouring her lungs. Another child, too far gone to stand, laughed. Not the innocent laugh of youth, but a hollow, bubbling sound, as if Nurgle himself spoke through the broken shell. His body melted into the earth, his flesh becoming one with the infected mud. They were soldiers no longer. They were relics of corruption. The commissar fought to the end. His bolt pistol fired until the chamber clicked empty, until his hand trembled and his eyes burned with fever. When the demons finally swarmed him, he did not beg nor cry. He spat blood into their faces and cursed their god. The demons did not care. They tore him apart, piece by piece, and from his ruin sprouted mushrooms and blackened flowers, growing faster than weeds in the corpse-soaked mud. Faith, fury, order, all had failed. Only decay remained. Beyond the trenches, the world itself rotted. Cities collapsed under the weight of plague. Manufactoria fell silent, their chimneys belching smoke no longer but coughing clouds of spores. Those who tried to flee found only more sickness. Rivers turned to sludge. Crops became fields of black rot. The very air betrayed its people. Every breath was a prayer to Nurgle. Children who once played in ruins became carriers of death, their touch spreading infection faster than fire. Their laughter, when it came, was no longer theirs. It was the echo of a god who delighted in their suffering. And yet, the Imperium did not abandon the world, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. The Astra Militarum returned, not with hope of salvation, but with orders of cleansing. Orbital bombardments rained fire upon hive cities already hollowed by rot. Civilians who had clung to life were incinerated, their final screams lost in the roar of falling ordnance. The ecclesiarchy declared the world tainted, beyond redemption. The Inquisition, silent as a blade in the dark, marked it with a single word, exterminatus. When the cyclonic torpedoes fell, the sky burned. Oceans boiled. The crust split. And in one cataclysmic heartbeat, the children, the demons, the rot, and all that remained of innocence were reduced to ash. But death was not the end. Not here, for in the warp, corruption festers eternal. The souls of those children, torn and twisted, drifted into Nurgle's garden. There, among fields of decay and forests of fungi, they found a grotesque mockery of peace. They became playthings of the plague god, their suffering transfigured into eternal service. Some crawled as new plague-bearers, their voices lost in the endless tally of disease. Others became little more than buzzing swarms, their laughter carried on the wings of flies. And some still remembered they were once children, though their prayers were now drowned in joyous, sickening rot. This was their eternity. Not salvation, not rest, but service in the garden of despair. And what of the Imperium? It did not weep. It did not remember. The scribes struck the name of the world from records, as if it had never existed. To them, it was another necessary sacrifice, another number in an endless war. Millions dead, thousands of children among them, erased in a single line of ink. That was the true horror. Not the demons, not the plague, not even Nurgle's laughter, but the silence that followed. For in the vast machinery of the Imperium, no life was sacred. No child was remembered. They were nothing more than kindling for a fire that could never burn out. And so the legacy of that world is not written in stone, nor sung in hymn. It lingers only in whispers, in the dreams of soldiers who fought nearby, in the nightmares of priests who prayed too late. Sometimes, in the trenches of other worlds, children still clutch lasguns too heavy for their hands. Sometimes they look across no man's land and swear they see small figures in the fog, laughing with voices that are not their own. And when the buzzing of flies grows loud, louder than war itself, veterans feel their blood run cold. For they remember. They remember the world that fell. They remember the children who fought. They remember that in the Garden of Nurgle, innocence is not spared. In the grim darkness of the far future, there's only war. But for the children of a world lost to rot, even war was a mercy denied. For in the Emperor's silence, and in Nurgle's laughter, they found the same truth. Hope was never meant for them.